Welcome to Investor's Guide. I'm so glad you tuned in. This is a show that will help you find the perfect investment product in the market by looking at your needs. Remember, we talk to long-term investors on this show, so you need to have a horizon of 10 to 15 years. That's what we define as long-term on this show. And you can, of course, write to us if you have any questions at all. Our email ID is at the bottom of your screen. You can reach us on Facebook and you can reach me personally on Twitter. It'll be my pleasure to hear from you. Now, remember, the budget has been announced. It's been a couple of weeks, but we're still focusing on it because so much has changed and so many questions came in from you over the last few weeks. So we're going to try and answer all of those questions over the next half an hour. Vishal Kapoor, GM Wealth Management, Standard Chartered, joining me in the studio. Pranav Sayata, Partner Tax at Ernst & Young. And of course, Narendra Kumar, CEO Value Research, joins us in Delhi. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out to join us. Now, I'm assuming, of course, that our viewers are familiar with all of the announcements that were made because we got so many questions from them. Pranav, one of the questions that we got from most of our viewers was the increased deduction under Section 80C and the increased allocation under the PPF that's now gone up to 1.5. Is that applicable from this financial year? Can we start making those investments right away?
Well, absolutely. The way the finance bill is structured, this particular amendment becomes effective for the financial year 14-15 and onwards. And therefore, very much the limit increases from 1 lakh to 1.5 lakhs from this year itself. Both contributions to PPF as well as all the other items under ETC all become effective from April 1-14, the financial year beginning April 1-14.
But is there paperwork involved? Is it likely that I will go there to make that extra added deposit in my PPF and they look up at me and say, what are you talking about?
So the PPF rules might take a few days to get in line, but the act, if this particular bill comes through, so one has to wait, of course, this is still a bill presented in the parliament. Hopefully it passes through the legislative process, which will take maybe a month or so. I'm told by end of July it will probably get passed. So one has to wait, of course, but once it gets passed, it will be effective for the financial year 14-15.
Well, Vishal, the other question that we've got across the board from everybody is simply this. I have an added 50,000 rupees to allocate right now. Where do I invest that money? And we have to remember that while last year we complained that there was so much crowding in that 1 lakh rupees, now they're all crowding 1.5 lakh rupees. What do you think is the best option within all of the options that we have right now?
For long-term investors, which is the viewers for the show, I always felt that the ELSS category has been sort of underweight in this ATC allocation, because when you look at all the retirement sort of deductions that happen for salaried employees, there's not a lot of room after some amount of insurance that people would have bought, some amount of PPF contributions that you're already making. So that's one. The second one is, of course, that PPF has gone up. So if someone is really comfortable with that instrument and you want to use the headroom available fully, then that's an option. But I would think that, yes, all of it is available. I would prefer for long-term investors, ELSS as an option to really look for inflation index sort of returns over the long term.
All right. So focus on the ELSS, and what I'm going to do is on your screen right now is a list of tax saving funds which are ELSS that we picked for the year. That's on your screen and you can use them. And the person who picked those funds for us, Narendra Kumar. Narendra, of course, we talked about this last week as well. It's very interesting, the fact that the finance minister mentioned retirement-linked mutual funds. Where will that find space along with the ELSS within that same deduction? And do you think that we should go ahead and do ELSS right now, or should we be holding on to that money and waiting for these new funds to be launched?
We have to wait for these new funds to be launched. All that we discussed last week was entirely based on, my understanding of the Mutual Fund Consultative Committee, which was working towards the design of this retirement plan, which was suggested to SEBI, and in turn, and that would have actually found its way to Finance Ministry. But that apart, I think, it has been extremely disappointing to see that, I don't find a mention of this in the finance bill. I find it in the highlights page. In the capital market section on page 12, you have the point number 6, that there is a parity with, in terms of taxation for pension fund with mutual fund retirement plans. But for it to become a law, I need to find a mention. Then comes, all the things that we are talking about. One is the design of these funds itself. That is what that will certainly be, anchored by SEBI or approved by SEBI, these plans or the design of it. And the way it has been planned is pretty straightforward. Every fund with some track record and simple funds will have additional plans. and and it will have portability. But more importantly, the 80cc provision that we have, where your deduction comes under the overall ambit of section 80C, which is 150,000 rupee. The real advantage is that the employer's contribution is a deductible expense for the employer, and it is not clubbed with your income, and that is the status of the NPS, and that is where I'm expecting this parity.
All right, so that's the unfortunate thing. Great idea there, but of course a little bit of a hiccup when it comes to execution. So in the meantime, we continue to focus on ELSS, we continue to focus on what we have within those deductions. Probably the other confusion that we had so far was with section 54 and 54F. It was a very small tweak that happened that caused a lot of confusion across the board for anybody who invests in house property. Take us through it. What does it mean? Is it in any way reason to worry?
The existing provision is that under section 54, that if an individual were to sell a residential house and within a certain period, 1 year before or 2 years after, purchases, or within 3 years after, constructs another residential house, the capital gain on the first house which is sold has been invested in the second house which is purchased. He gets complete exemption. That's the current provision, so long as the capital gain was a long-term gain and so on and so forth, subject to some conditions. But by and large, this was 54. 54F was slightly different. If there was an individual who earns a long-term capital gain on sale of any other capital asset other than a house and invests the sale proceeds or the net proceeds in a house, once again the capital gain on the sale of the long-term asset was granted as exempt. What this budget proposes to do is that for the new house that is purchased both under 54, which is a swap of one house for another, and under 54F, which is swap of some other long-term capital asset, maybe shares, jewelry, land, whatever, into a house. In both cases, it seeks to clarify that the new house that is acquired or constructed should be only one house and should be a house in India. So two real new things coming up. The capital gain stays as is. The long-term gain arises from sale of a house or from sale of any other capital asset. But the investment, the new acquisition or construction, has to be only one house, and it has to be a house in India. So it does two things. Houses outside India, investment made into houses outside India by some very high net worth individuals will not qualify for exempting the original capital gain. And the other is, there can be an investment only in one house. Now, that second piece, the fact that it can only be one house, is a little concerning. Because many a times what happens is a person who's living in a joint family sells one house maybe for 100, buys two houses in order to accommodate a larger joint family and have two units of the same family residing in two different houses. And there were some judgments which said that it should qualify equally for exemption, so long as the total amount invested in the two new houses is the entire capital gain that was earned from the first. That may now be difficult if this budget goes through. You can only invest in one new house. If I sell a house for 100, buy two houses, one for 60, the other for 40, only one of the two will qualify as a new house, the 60. The balance 40 will not qualify, therefore part of the gain may actually now get taxed.
All right, so that's, and if you have any questions about that, of course, you can write to us. I'm going to take one question from Ravi Shah, who wrote in. Now, he says he intends to invest in the Nifty. He wants to know which is the best ETF to invest in. He's in the highest tax bracket. He's an NRI. Vishal, how do you pick Nifty ETF?
The two options, two separate options. One is, of course, the ETF, and the other one is a Nifty fund. So I think both are available depending on which platform you choose, whether it's a mutual fund or buying it on the ETF. But I think the ETF, there is a BEES, the Nifty BEES, which is a good option, very low tracking error. And among funds, there are index funds which track the Nifty, may have a slightly larger tracking error. But again, the process may be very, very simple, especially for NRIs. So that might be the other option. There's one by Franklin that has a pretty good track record on that.
All right, we're going to slip into a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about FMPs and we'll answer all of the questions you had about debt fund taxation. That's on the other side. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Investors Guide in ET now. Thank you for staying with us. We're talking about the big changes that came in during the Union Budget. We're helping you understand the fine print now that we've had some chance really to examine what's in the finance bill. And the big question across the board is for FMPs. I made the investment with a 3-year lock-in, assuming I would get a certain tax treatment. Now that tax treatment has changed. Vishal, what everybody's asking us right now is, can I withdraw? I'm going to take this question. This one came in on Twitter from T. Chitti Babu. He says, I bought a few FMPs March 2014 for the double indexation benefit, expire in April 2015. What impact will it have if I withdraw now? The question first is, can he withdraw now?
He cannot withdraw because there's no redemption on an FMP. What he can technically do is sell on the exchange because these are listed instruments. But I think liquidity on FMPs is a concern. So there's no real market unless it develops now that a lot of people want to sell and some people want to buy. So that's something that we'll have to watch out for. But practically, I would think that there aren't too many options in terms of withdrawing an FMP as we stand today.
But Pranav, for those people who are holding FMPs right now, again, the same question, does the change become applicable at this point? Do they still have some sort of a window to make a change in their allocation? You know, if they're deciding to put money in, or if they believe the FMP might expire before April 2015, where does everything fall right now? How should they handle it?
I'm afraid people are stuck really. The way the budget provisions have been introduced, unless they are reconsidered, and I hope they are reconsidered, but as things currently stand as proposed in the budget, there is no window of opportunity left because the budget this year, as you know, has come late. Instead of on 28th February, we have the budget only on 10th of July. And the provisions of the finance bill, the budget, if they are passed, get effective for the entire financial year 14-15, which means they will be effective for any income earned from April 1, 2014 till 31st March 2015. The result is that if an FMP matures at any time now or even has already matured maybe in April 2014 or May 2014, the new budget and the provisions of the bill will apply across the board. So effectively, it is a retrospective amendment for all practical purposes, though technically not retrospective. Of course, the sad part was that this budget came in late, but whatever may be the reasons, the fact is anyone who had matured, redeemed, sold, debt fund, capital gains arising under the growth fund maybe, will be stuck with this tax for the entire financial year 14-15. The other piece of retroactivity really is that, and that's a complaint again, that what happens to people who have already invested, maybe the FMPs have not matured or the debt funds have not been redeemed, but the investment was made already before 10th of July. And this investment was made by the individual with the clear understanding that he will be taxed on a long-term gain if he holds on for more than a year, and that all the benefits of indexation, etc. are available. The investment was made with that understanding, with that kind of promise, if I might use that word, which was given to him under law. Unfortunately, although the investment might have been made before July 2014, before 10 July 2014, whenever it matures, if this finance bill becomes law, it will be taxed as short term unless he holds the funds for more than 36 months. In some of the funds like FMPs, the period itself is not beyond 12 months or 13 months or 14 months, and therefore the question of it becoming long term does not arise. So you are stuck with a short term gain unless you hold for more than 36 months. You may not even be able to hold for more than 36 months. You therefore get no indexation whatsoever. You are stuck with a higher capital gains tax rate of 20% plus surcharge and cess, or rather 30% plus surcharge and cess, because if you are in the highest tax bracket and it's a short-term gain, you are stuck with 30% without indexation. And even if you hold for more than 3 years, if by chance you do in a debt fund, you still have a 20% tax plus surcharge and cess, although you do get indexation and a long-term gain, only if you hold for more than 36 months.
Well,
so not a good scene unless the government reconsiders it. The justification that is sought to be given is that probably only 5% of the investment in the debt funds comes from individuals and the rest comes from corporates and so on.
So, but it's possible then for the government to separate that 5%. Individuals needn't be taxed uniformly with institutions. Do you think there's a possibility the finance minister might reconsider?
There is hope, because there are some statements being made that probably they will look at this given the kind of representations that have gone in, and one does hope that this is being relooked at before the budget becomes law, and that they at least give a relaxation from an individual standpoint.
Well, if the finance minister is listening, on behalf of all the small investors, This is really unfair and we would like you to reconsider. Narendra, I'm going to take a question from one such investor. Farooq has written in, he's 70 years old. He says half his portfolio right now are in debt funds and FMPs. The budget raised the tax to 20% from 10%. He wants to know, when will it be effective? These are questions we just answered. But more importantly, what his alternatives are. If he were to take that money out with the penalty or without the penalty, where does he put that money right now? What are the options for someone in his tax bracket and his age group?
No, he won't have a choice. You know, the only alternative he will have is fixed deposit, and there will be no tax arbitrage. You know, the kind of advantageous tax treatment which was available to FMP will not be available. And I really wonder that, you know, we will have FMPs in future which will have a time, you know, which will have a term of over 3 years. For him, it might still be a good idea, but we have to see that, you know, whether fund companies will be offering 3-year FMPs in future. Right now, he's stuck with this.
All right. So this answer also goes out then to Dr. Pranav Doshi, who wrote in asking us about the same thing. When will it be applicable? Will there be indexation allowed? And of course, we'll be tracking this for you. So if you have more questions, you can write in to us. Vishal Praveen Kumar tweeted in. He wants to know now, are FDs better compared to FMPs, liquid or debt funds, especially for a 1-year period? So earlier, whenever someone wrote into us saying, I'm going to put money away for 1 year till I find a house, till I get married, till I do whatever, we used to always say, pick one of the liquid funds. Does that change? Does that advice change now from your point of view?
I think FDs are as good. And you know, yes, the tax has changed, but all that has happened is that it is now taxed the same way as other fixed income instruments, especially FDs. Therefore, it is not to say that it has become worse than FDs. So we have to now look at the fundamental characteristics of these two products separately and see which one do I prefer. An FD, as we know, gives you a guaranteed rate of return, which is guaranteed by the bank, but you have to hold on for a specific period. A fixed income fund may not give you a guaranteed return, and therefore you may have the benefit, upside or downside, of a slightly variable return because the underlying instruments could be valued differently on every day. But it may give you the benefit of liquidity, which an FD does not give. So to that extent, therefore, you know, the true characteristics of these products actually come out. You have to go with what is more valuable to you. Is it liquidity? In which case, this may actually work better than FDs because you could be accruing a certain return which is comparable to an FD, even for short periods of time, 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months, etc. You could benefit from capital gain or loss that may happen during that intervening period, depending on what strategy in fixed income you chose. The key thing is that just because the tax has changed, it doesn't make it worse off than an FD. It's now at an even keel.
Now there is. Okay, so for those of us who are in open-ended debt funds at this point, if we can afford to stay in for 3 years, it just does make sense to hold on?
Absolutely. I think if you can afford to stay for 3 years, then clearly there's a tax benefit after 3 years. 2, by redeeming now, it doesn't benefit you in any way unless your choice of renewing that or investing that redeemed money is into an asset class that can yield you better. Now that an FD may or may not necessarily be able to do.
All right, time for another very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about tax treatment and what was announced in the budget. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to watching Investor's Guide and ET Now. Thank you for staying with us. We're running out of time, but I quickly want to cover as much as possible. Prabh, before we went into break, we were talking about the the taxation on debt funds, and you had a very interesting idea. You said if you can and you stay for 3 or 4 years, the indexation will almost mean close to no tax at all.
Yeah, that's the whole point. You know that if one person holds on to the debt fund for 3 years plus, then he gets exactly the benefit that he was going to get even pre this budget, which means he gets 3+ years indexation, maybe 4 years indexation. The result is that virtually he gets out with 0 tax in a debt fund. As compared to that, if he gets out in maybe a little less than 2 years, he pays the full tax on basis of a short-term capital gain, which might be 30% plus surcharge and cess, which might be massive.
All right, so this is what we're learning right now. Don't do anything. Don't pull out anything. Don't break any investment. First of all, we have to wait for that finance bill to be passed, and we have to make sure it turns into the law. And of course, if you are in an open-ended fund and you can afford to stay invested for 3 years, that makes most sense. Vishal, REITs. We can finally have real estate in our portfolios along with the rest of our investments. Does it make sense for us right now to wait for REITs to come out, find out what it is and what it offers us, maybe allocate some money that we can put aside in REITs this year. Also, there was a mention of an infrastructure trust as well. It's likely it might have larger tax breaks. Do you think both of those sound interesting for us as retail investors?
I do think so. But of course, we'll have to wait for the exact structure and, what are the minimum, how it is structured, etc. But clearly, I think the question mark around how it is taxed has been clarified, which is a very, very welcome change and news for the investor. So it's clear now how it will be taxed. Now we have to wait for REITs and infra REITs to be launched. And then, we should definitely give it a good look.
All right, so we'll be keeping an eye on it on this show, of course, and we'll let you know when REITs does come out and if it makes sense for you. But I want to slip in one more question. Akhil Fred has written in. He writes in on behalf of his retired mother. He said she just retired and received a corpus of 10 lakh rupees. She'd like to invest that money for 3 to 5 years. She wants to know where to invest the money. Now, she has a life insurance plan. She has 75,000 rupees a year going into a ULIP. She has a health cover. Her husband will retire as well in the next 2 years. Narendra, 10 lakh rupees retired. Where should she put her money now that FMPs are off the table?
No, FMPs are off the table, but I don't think fixed income can be ruled out, and you just have to devise one just has to think in terms of what are the alternatives. You have bonds, you have tax-free bonds, you have even open-end funds, as well as if we have more than 3-year term FMPs, that might still be relevant for investors like her. Because such investors are long-term fixed income investors, and your expectation is to derive periodic income from it in a fairly predictable manner, and which is understandable, and these funds will be in a position to deliver that. If you are not expecting to derive periodic income from this investment and want to accumulate, grow this investment steadily, then maybe our stable growth portfolio, and you can do without that ULIP, you can do without the insurance thing, unless you have dependents, which looks unlikely. And if you're looking at deriving income, then maybe consider senior citizen savings scheme, 9%, and if it's going to supplement a part of your pension income, that will be fairly predictable and regular without any uncertainty.
She has written in saying she does draw a pension right now. Vishal, the 10 lakh rupees will easily, she's allowed 15 lakh rupees in the senior citizen savings scheme. Should she put all of it in senior citizens, or should she divide it equity and debt a little bit?
No, so she could choose fixed income, but I think one of the objectives is also to have some amount of equity in the portfolio, is what I could sense from the question. So yeah, I think because it is more than 3 years, fixed income funds are equally attractive, and they have not therefore gone away from the table. They're very much there. But the other quick point I wanted to make is that in the earlier tax regime, we could look at pure equity funds and pure debt funds and combine them to make a portfolio. But in the new tax regime, a balanced fund and some proportion may be an interesting idea, because if you have something with a 65-35 mix already, you can top up the fixed income with other fixed income products, like either a retirement savings scheme or any fixed income fund, but some proportion through a balanced fund to take care of the equity portion, but also have some amount of debt portion may be useful, not just for this portfolio, but other portfolios as well.
Considering if you hold a balanced fund for longer than a year, it becomes completely tax-free.
Right. So it still enjoys the benefit of equity taxation.
All right, so which is what Narendra was saying as well. Of course, our stable growth portfolio is on your screen. 4 balanced funds. It's as simple as that. Hold it for a year. It's entirely tax-free, irrespective of everything else that was said in the budget. That makes most sense. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but if you have questions about taxation or the budgets, you can write to us. You'll come back and answer questions for us.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
And of course, Vishal and Narendra have been with us now for 5 years. They'll answer your questions as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for spending time with us and answering our questions. Narendra in Delhi, always a pleasure to have you on this show. Write to us, tweet, get in touch. It's a pleasure to hear from you. Thanks for watching.